And when she woke up, he was raping her. The victim was not present for today's sentencing, but the prosecution told the court that that was no reflection on the case. Let's head back into court for more of that hearing.
He also, with a Boston police officer, Andrew Biggio, started the Boston Wounded Veterans Charitable Motorcycle Run. They raised a lot of money for veterans that had been wounded. I know you have the letters. I wanted to make a quick comment on that because and I don't mean to suggest that the government tried to assert a negative from it, but irrespective of someone's past, the court should consider whether or not there will be a support network, and there is. And this is a support network that Mr. Zerola has earned over the course of his lifetime. These people didn't just show up for the heck of it or because they had nothing better to do. You might recall a letter from a Robert Walsh. Robert Walsh had a conversation with Mr. Zerola one day, and he had mentioned to Mr. Zerola that friends of his that Mr. Zerola didn't know had no home heating oil. And Mr. Zerola, without any prompting, paid the bill for the home heating oil. Now, Mr. Zerola didn't do that because he thought someday that would help him before Judge Ames at a sentencing hearing. Mr. Zerola didn't send out press releases regarding that. And that was only one out of thousands of similar acts. Mr. Zerola did it the way it should be done, silently, because it was the right thing to do. I can tell you, as early as this morning, I was telling people that Judge Ames is a stickler for deadlines. The deadline has come and gone for the sentencing memo because I was still receiving letters. I don't want to hyperbolize, but I'm probably at about 100 letters right now sent in support. And these come from all walks of life. These comes from...
Counsel, if you wish to submit further documents, letters, or anything else, I'm happy to receive.
Thank you. I knew that you would probably, knowing that you're diligent, had read the memos. I didn't want to be sending things at the last minute because I didn't want the court to think that I didn't take your deadline as serious. But the point being is, sure, some of these are clients that he skillfully got out of harm's way, but a lot of them are clients that came to him and said, I can no longer pay you. And Mr. Zerola, I've never come across a client where he filed a motion to withdraw because money became an issue. There are neighbors, there are people that were friends with his mother is of failing health. She's too old to come, but one of her sisters has been here every day, and Mr. Zerola refers to her as his mother. And these are people that he has, again, earned this with. So that's certainly something the court should consider. The court should consider, not as a negative, conversely, as a positive factor, Mr. Zerola's age. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that like this. You know, when you're trying to formulate what an actual number is, and you do not necessarily a quantitative, but a qualitative analysis, there's really two ways to do it, right? You can assign each day a unit, and there's two ways they do it in mathematics. One is they call it a constant, but two, they call it a variable. And I'm asking you to consider it as a variable. And what I mean by that is not every day in prison, incarcerated, is the same. Not every day that Mr. Zerola is presumably going to serve, because we haven't even asked for probation, is going to be the same. But if you extend that argument, not every prison day is the same for every person. And what I mean by that is, if you were a 25 or 26-year-old with a clean bill of health, and you were being sentenced to prison on a drug or gun-related offense, that is still going to be a very difficult time. I go to these prisons. I've never served a prison sentence, but I hear the stories. I see the stories. Prison, despite what some people might see or read or hear, is a very difficult place. It is a violent place. It is a scary place. It is a psychologically traumatizing place. Criminals are not coddled, and I don't care what any member of the media says to the contrary about that. So as difficult as that would be for someone, say, 25 or 26, that's going in on a gun offense, Think of how difficult that is going to be for someone who is 52 years old, and let's not ignore it, going in convicted of a sexual offense. Mr. Zerola, I didn't know him when he was 25, but certainly is now 52 years old. You know from the pleadings that he has significant health problems. He is suffering from a rare and aggressive form of eye cancer, ocular cancer. And Mr. Pallenbaum, and I don't think that he did this nefariously, but suggested that there will really be without limitation his treatment. That couldn't be further from the truth. Mr. Zerola sought and received treatment in Massachusetts for his eye cancer, and despite having some of the best and brightest people in the field in the entire world, even they said it was too rare for them and they didn't feel comfortable because they didn't have enough experience treating it, so they had all recommended and referred him to Dr. Shields in Philadelphia. Now, you know, Judge, that he had went and saw Dr. Shields, and Mr. Zerola did not want to further delay the trial for anyone, and we didn't press after the court was gracious enough to let him take that appointment to seek any further delay. But Dr. Shields, although certainly while she confirmed the findings that the surgery was not successful, that cancerous malignant tumor remains in his eye, and she did cite some growth, but not, overnight growth, still her prognosis is fairly dire, and the recommendation was for Mr. Zerola to go back to Philadelphia as soon as he can. No rape is good. And so while I don't minimize that, what the jury found, that, again, we can't, and I agree with the Commonwealth, we can't parse out or extrapolate exactly what they were thinking. We don't know if they found that she was actually awake, but the stupefaction instruction had some credence to it. We don't know. But we do know that no rape is good rape, but the allegations, to the extent that they were proven in this case, certainly don't distinguish them from another type of rape, a rape where perhaps a woman is accosted in an alleyway, or a woman is forcibly raped and suffers beating during the rape. So there's nothing unique about these facts that would warrant such a departure, and it actually cuts against all of the work that the Guideline Commission did. To the contrary, and I don't think age should play a role, but to the extent, again, there is optics involved, if there were two college kids in a similar circumstance in this case, I'd probably be asking for house time. Now, when we talk about, one other thing I wanted to talk about is rehabilitation. Certainly there was evidence of alcohol use and drug use by Mr. Zerola as well. And that's something that the guidelines talk about the court should consider. Mr. Zerola has been on conditions of release since the inception of this case for the better part of three and a half years. He was outfitted with a scram device, and he was required initially, I believe, 4 times, and it was reduced to 3 times when the medical issues came up, to have his blood alcohol content or his through sweat, whatever the scram device monitors, tested. Probably estimating about 3,000 scram tests were performed, and not on a single occasion did it detect that Mr. Zerola had consumed even a sip of alcohol in 3 years, which shows that he recognized the seriousness of the offense that he was charged for. He recognized that a judge, and I don't believe you set the first conditions, but that it was an order of a court he had to follow, and he followed it, and he followed it to a T. And certainly, DOC has done a much better job in getting progressive with addressing rehabilitation. I know, again, anecdotally from other clients, there is now meaningful opportunity for him to afford himself of all kinds of counseling. Obviously, with his degrees, he doesn't need the vocational training. He would take it if he could. They'll probably have him be a teacher. But certainly there is dual diagnosis, there's substance abuse, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, anger abuse. There's as much programming as the person wants. And knowing Mr. Zerola, he will be ambitious about it, he will be vociferous about it, he will be prolific about it, and he will do that. But the point being is the court has a pretty good body of evidence over the past 3 years that you're outfitted with a bracelet, you're on home confinement, you cannot have a sip of alcohol, and he's done it. And I know that I've talked to his probation officer. He is dutifully reported in person, by phone. He's coordinated with them the medical treatment, everything he was supposed to do. So there's a pretty good history that he knows he can't drink. He knows rehabilitation has to be part of the process.
The defense attorney there treading really lightly with the judge, trying to give his definition of the difference between a date rape and, to use his words, an alley rape. But he runs the risk of inflaming this judge, of trying to say there are levels or a lesser type of rape. When we come back, the defense attorney is going to wrap up his argument, and then we'll watch together the judge's ruling. Keep it right here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, Ashley Benefield is days away from going on trial for shooting her husband. Did she shoot in self-defense or in cold blood?
Closing Arguments, tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
She could hear the bat hitting her father.
Michael was under the influence of Courtney.
Michael Moore is not the person who killed my father.
Accomplice to Murder with Vanny Politan, Sunday night, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are wrapping up our coverage in the sentencing hearing of a former prosecutor, Gary Zerola. A jury convicted him of rape last month, and his attorney, as we're watching, is wrapping up his argument for leniency. And after that, the judge will issue her ruling.
2 to 3 years is going to be exceptionally, and I know his family members probably don't want to hear this, 2 to 3 years is going to be exceptionally difficult and dangerous for Mr. Zerola. He is going to probably, on a daily basis, have to deal with comments, some of them on the threatening side. He probably, on too high of a frequency, is going to have to deal with physical confrontations, and he's going to have to survive. He's going to have to survive the cancer, and he's going to have to survive for the charge for which he stands accused of. The parsimony principle is something that's been recognized in federal court, and I believe in language, Rodriguez and some of the other cases in state court, that stands for the proposition that a sentence should be sufficient but not greater than necessary. Again, every day is difficult. I respectfully ask that you sentence to Mr. Zerola to no more than 3 years, no less than 2 years in state prison. And I know it has no legal binding authority, but I ask that you recommend Norfolk, because I believe they probably are the best equipped medically to deal with patients that have serious conditions.
Thank you, counsel.
And my client, one last thing.
Sure.
I don't want and I know your experience, you won't take it as a lack of contrition. Obviously, with a pending appeal,
yes,
Mr. Zerola cannot get up and make any type of statement. And I know you know it. You've been doing this for a long time, but I have to say it. Please don't mistake that for
I was
lack
going
of
to
contrition.
ask you if he wished to allocute.
He does, but I've advised him that he cannot.
And that is not surprising, and this court, it's probably a very prudent step. And I understand that that doesn't mean that he doesn't wish to speak, but at this point with an appeal pending, ought not to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have read very carefully and repeatedly and considered the memoranda of the Commonwealth and the memoranda of the defense. I have now listened very carefully to the statement of the victim in this case, and I have read more than once the letters of support, particularly the letter of the brother that laid out the circumstances of Mr. Zerola's life. I have also considered the acts and circumstances for which he was convicted in this case. It is this court's judgment that a sentence of not less than 5 years, not more than 10 years, is warranted by these facts, and the court imposes a sentence of 5 to 10 years in this case. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Your Honor.
No, impose everything.
Okay.
Please. You're welcome.
Mr. Zerola, as required by statute, I must inform you that the records regarding the charge for which you have been found not guilty will be sealed by the Commissioner of Probation and by the court, unless you notify the Commissioner of Probation in writing within 10 days that you do not want those records sealed. To request that those records not be sealed, you must use the request not to seal form. A copy of that form has been left with counsel at defense table. I cannot accept the form here in court. You must submit that to the Commissioner of Probation at the address provided on the form. Please be aware that if records regarding the charges for which you have been found not guilty are sealed, you will be unable to access the sealed records of the not guilty disposition or any records regarding to those charges. If you want copies of any documents regarding those charges before the records are sealed, you should request those copies from the court within 10 days. Do you understand that, Mr. Zerola?
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Okay.
The record shall also reflect, and then I'll give you a chance to impose the sentence, that it is the court's recommendation that the sentence be served in Norfolk County. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Zerola, the jury having returned a verdict of guilty as to indictment number 2184 CR 00072 to offense 001 to the lesser included offense of rape, the court sentences you today to a term of not more than 10 years, not less than 5 years. That sentence to be served at Norfolk at your request. The court is imposing the DNA fee of $110 as well as the victim witness fee of $90. You're being notified that pursuant to Rule 64, you have a right to appeal the sentence to the appellate division in writing within 10 days, and that's pursuant to Rule 64. You're also being notified that you have a right to appeal the conviction within 30 days pursuant to Superior Court Rule 65.
Attorney Gary Zerola there. You see him discussing things with his attorney. He understands this process well because he himself is an attorney. Let's bring in two trial attorneys to help us break down what we are seeing here. Wendy Patrick and Michelle Thomas are with us. Michelle, your thoughts on 5 to 10 years for this defendant who was convicted on one of the charges but acquitted on the top ones, the aggravated rape and the burglary work he was acquitted on, but convicted on the rape charge against him.
Good evening, Julie. I think that was appropriate. I mean, the defense was asking for just 2 to 3 years under the, I think, mitigating factors argument that jail was too harsh for him and he had a great support system and this rape occurred. It wasn't the same type of rape that occurs in an alley. And quite frankly, those arguments are offensive. Rape is rape. And I'm quite certain that this 21-year-old victim at the time felt that she was in danger and felt that she was should not have been subjected to the horror that she experienced that's going to haunt her for the rest of her life. So I do think that the 5 to 10 year range is appropriate. The court certainly gave consideration, giving him the recommending a specific facility that he requested. He is a former attorney, but I think that that's really an appropriate sentence given the crime of which he was convicted.
Yeah, Wendy, this is a defendant who asked about getting a specific placement when it comes to where he's going to serve out his sentence because of an eye cancer that he has. Is that typical that a judge approves that, as it seems like has been done in this case, or the Department of Corrections approving where they want to go? And anything else standing out to you about this particular sentencing?
That remembering my years as a criminal defense attorney, this has got to be one of the most challenging types of sentencing hearings that you appear at when you're talking about rape, sexual assault. There is no way to describe it that is not offensive. This is one of those crimes that across the board, I mean, criminal defense attorneys are just as disgusted. They have families too. So what you heard here was good guy evidence. He's a former lawyer, he's turned over a new leaf, he doesn't drink, and really trying to mitigate this case through proving credibility through compliance. He's done what he's supposed to do. He's following the rules. But it's just so hard to undo something this significant, especially, you would think that having this type of a career would be a mitigant. It's an aggravant. It's one of those things that you just can't argue it away. This is somebody that should have known better. And to talk about, well, he's not the same kind of a person when he drinks versus doesn't drink, that's a dangerous proposition should he have a drink again. So I think the judge, given her experience, did probably what the defense attorney and his client already knew she was going to do, is didn't impose that lesser sentence, because you got to consider the victim and the facts of the case as well.
Her Honor has spoken, and the appeal is pending. So we will see what happens next for Gary Zerola, as he is now going to be moved into this incarceration that he's been sentenced to. Michelle and Wendy, stand by. We are going to shift our
Alec Baldwin is an A-list celebrity in the public spotlight for over 40 years. He has won awards and earned millions as a great dramatic actor, comedic actor, and leading man. Alec Baldwin is also a man with a strong personality and outspoken opinions. He's had his share of controversy through the years, but nothing even close to what happened on the set of a movie he was shooting entitled Rust. While rehearsing a scene in a church, Alec drew his weapon, a Colt 45, and the gun went off. A single bullet struck two people, cinematographer Helena Hutchins and director Joel Souza. Helena died. Joel survived, but there are still a lot of questions surrounding what happened and how a live round ended up on a movie set where everyone is supposed to be safe. We'll bring in our experts to examine those questions as we continue to investigate the Alec Baldwin movie set shooting. Thanks for joining us. I'm Vinny Politan. Alec Baldwin will not be held criminally responsible for having that gun in his hand, the gun that went off, the gun that discharged a bullet that took the life of Helena Hutchins. And it's not surprising, not shocking, but it leaves you kind of empty with more questions. And it's because of the way it all ended. It didn't end with a jury telling us what happened. It ended with a judge dismissing the case.
Court also has power, inherent power. Per State versus Lemire, where discovery violations inject needless delay into the proceedings, courts may impose meaningful sanctions to effectuate their inherent power and promote efficient judicial administration. The state's discovery violation has injected a needless, incurable delay into the instant jury trial. Dismissal with prejudice is warranted to ensure the integrity of the judicial system and the efficient administration of justice. Your motion to dismiss with prejudice is granted.
That's how it ends. Alec Baldwin, emotional, obviously. He knows he doesn't have to go to prison now. He's not going to be a convicted killer in a criminal sense. But we're still left with a huge question in this case. And it's the first question most people ask when they talk about this movie set shooting, which is, how did the live round get onto the movie set? It should never happen. And it did. But how and who? And I don't know if that question has been answered. We're going to try to answer that question, try to get some clarity to it. There's a couple of theories on this that we've been able to sort of extract from what we've heard in court and seen in court papers and in interviews, et cetera. And we begin with what really is the state's theory in all of this. Alec Baldwin and his revolver. So the live round came from Hannah Gutierrez. We know that she's the one who loaded his weapon. Now, where did she get that live round from? Well, this theory says she got it from her dad, who's the legendary armorer, Thel Reed. And it's that simple. Thel Reed's her father. He has some live rounds. Somehow, some way, she accidentally brings him onto the set and then accidentally loads the weapon. There's another theory. Alec Baldwin, the live rounds given to him by Hannah Gutierrez, right? We know that, but Gutierrez got the round from prop master Sarah Zachary. Sarah Zachary got the round of Rust ammunition and from the props supplier, Seth Kenney. So Sarah Zachary gets it from Seth Kenney. And then Seth Kenney, where did he get the round from? Well, apparently he got the round from Thel Reed after they worked on the show 1883 together. During the show, there was a coaching session where the actors trained by shooting live rounds. And 125 of Thel's live 45 long Colt rounds were never used, and Seth kept them. So they're from Thel, but Seth is the one that kept them. So under one theory, Seth Kenney is introducing them. In another theory, Hannah Gutierrez through her father. But in both cases, it seems like the live round initiates from legendary armorer Thel Reed. But the question is, who got it from him? Wow. In the hours after the shooting, by the way, Kenney reached out to a man named Troy Teskey in an attempt to prove his innocence and suggesting that it was Gutierrez, Hannah, who had messed up. Teskey, former police officer in Arizona. Teskey had been known to store ammunition for Thel Reed. So Thel Reed, some of his ammo is being stored by somebody else, Troy Teskey. Seth Kenney asked Teskey to send him some of Thel's ammo. Kenney believed it could match Thel's ammo at Teskey's house to the live rounds found on Rust. And then he could prove that, it was Hannah who had gotten the rounds from her father. But they both got the rounds from their father, I think. I need some more answers, some more clarity. So I need to bring in someone who knows even more than I do. Well, I don't even know a lot. He knows it all. Our special guest, Hannah Gutierrez's defense attorney, Jason Bowles, is with us. Jason, I went through that, trying to extract information from a trial, from interviews, from attorney arguments, etc. Is it right? And what are your thoughts about where this live round came from?
Yeah, you absolutely have that right. Very impressive the way you put that together. I'll tell you what, we're never going to definitively get the answer now, I don't think, because the biggest thing that happened was today, Troy Teskey had the remainder of those rounds from the batch that came from Joe Swanson to Troy, who was storing them, and then they went to Thel, as you put in the graphic, and that's a picture of those rounds. And then they went to Seth Kenney on the set of 1883. Troy Teskey, for years, has said to the state he would give them these rounds so they could test them. We pleaded with them to take the rounds to test them. They never did. Finally, at the end of Hannah's trial, he turns them over to the sheriff. Rather than testing them with the FBI, which we thought they would do the right thing, they hide the evidence in a new case and a new case number. So those were never turned over to Baldwin's team. They didn't know about them, that they had been done anything with them. They didn't know that report had been written. So here's the problem: we're not going to know until they test those.
So if the rounds on the Rust set came from that batch, what does that mean? Like, how do we know who brought those live rounds then onto the set? How do we know it's Hannah versus Seth Kenney through Sarah?
Well, Thel Reed says that Hannah never had access to those rounds that he had that were stored at Troy Teskey's. The only one that we know that had access to them was Seth Kenney. We also know that he had the green ammo can, which Thel said he would have, and he did have it at his shop. 40 days after the incident occurred, tragic incident, the sheriff finally searched his place. Green ammo can was empty. Seth Kenney testified today he brought ammunition back, as I understand it, from the 1883 set. Where did those go? Now, one of the big things he had mentioned early on was the powder didn't match of live rounds that were found with the ones on set. That's why they need to test those rounds from Troy Teskey to match the powder and determine if those match the rounds on Rust. If they do, the only one that had access was Seth Kenney.
This is an incredible development in all of this. Now, in your trial, you're representing Hannah Gutierrez, and we're hearing, and we heard from the prosecutor that this was your witness. This is a witness on your list, but you didn't call this witness. Why wouldn't you call this witness?
We didn't call this witness. We, as I said, had pleaded with the state to take possession of these rounds. They never got back to us. Carrie Morrissey had said she was going to send law enforcement to take possession of these rounds. She never did. It became too late to designate these as exhibits and too late for us to test and do anything with them. And the state effectively prevented Teskey from doing anything with them because they said, hang on to them, preserve them. And so by that time, there was nothing to do except turn them over to the state.
Can you now somehow use this information and these developments to attempt to get Hannah's conviction overturned or get her a new trial?
Absolutely. We're going to be filing a motion Monday. There is a series of things that have turned over to us after the trial that we didn't have in the trial. A new interview of Seth Kenney. There were interviews of other people that weren't given to us before the trial. There was a third report of the expert, Mr. Haig. It wasn't provided to us. And then this new information today. And we're going to present this to the judge, who was a very smart, very fair judge, very experienced judge. And she applied the law today and said, we got to preserve the integrity of this system. We got to have a fair trial for everybody who is in that position.
Before I let you go here, Jason, I know it's been a long day for you as well. My concern in all these cases and for our system of justice is justice, which is the truth coming out in a courtroom. Do you think the truth has come out yet inside of a courtroom as to what really happened and why it happened?
A lot more of it came out today, but you're absolutely right. Justice is getting to the truth. And that is in every case that you ever have in this country. We do not have the whole truth because the state has refused to test those rounds. The state refused to do DNA and fingerprint on those rounds. The FBI lab is one of the best labs in the world, had all of that capability. They still do. The state still has the opportunity to test the rounds. But no, we have not heard the whole truth yet.
All right, I've got great news. Jason Bowles is staying with us for the hour. Great news. We're going to have other great guests and experts joining us. When we come back, we're going to go through these two theories to try to figure out how that live round ended up on a movie set. Don't go anywhere.
Did a customs agent commit cold-blooded murder?
Marsha Thompson is accused of fatally shooting her husband as he's lying on a couch.
She's claiming self-defense, alleging that Terry Thompson repeatedly threatened to kill her.
So what really happened inside this home?
Now a jury will decide the fate of this law enforcement officer.
And Court TV will bring it all to you.
The abused wife or murderer trial, weekday mornings, only on Court TV.
My heart goes out to the film industry for the devastating pain that this tragedy caused and the old wounds that have been reopened. I am saddened by the way the media sensationalized our traumatic tragedy and portrayed me as a complete monster, which has actually been the total opposite of what's been in my heart. Your Honor, when I took on Rust, I was young and I was naive, but I took my job as seriously as I knew how to. Despite not having proper time, resources, and staffing, when things got tough, I just did my best to handle it.
Hannah Gutierrez before she was sentenced to 18 months in prison, but there is still a question about how the live round ended up on the movie set. Two different theories we're looking at. Right now we're going to focus on the theory that Hannah Gutierrez is the one responsible for bringing that round onto the set. If you take a look at some of the evidence from her trial, here is a dummy box that was found, and there's one live round with the silver primer. We can see it right there. If you look at some selfies that Hannah Gutierrez took while on the set, if you look a little bit more closely at it, you will see that she's taking pictures, and you can see live rounds actually in the photograph itself. So there were live rounds around her. And then we get to the box. This is the box where the live round came from and was found. There was one found in here as well. 45 long Colt dummies, and you see the little JS. Well, the second thing that you're looking at right now was a text from Thel Reed to Hannah Gutierrez showing what the box looked like at their home. So you can see the similarities with the little JS. So prosecutors put those pieces together and said, hey, this is where it came from. It came from Thel Reed. It came from Hannah Gutierrez. Here's Seth Kenney testifying about where this live round could have come from and whether it could have come from him. Take a listen.
Have you ever had a box of dummies from Mr. Swanson with that label?
No, never.
And why would you not have a box with this label if you're sourcing your dummy rounds from Mr. Swanson?
Well, 1883 was the first period show that I needed 45 long Colt dummy rounds for. Prior to that, even though we had done a flashback scene with Tim McGraw in Yellowstone, there was no call for dummy rounds, or the prop master sourced them elsewhere. So I just never needed them. And when I did, I needed them by the thousands, not by boxes of 50. And so what happened is Joe Swanson, he asked me, do you want me to package them up? I said, no, there's no point. Right? It's more work for everybody. So he sent them to me in bulk.
Okay, and so you never had anything like this in your possession?
Never.
Okay, so you can see, well, obviously, he has a reason to not be 100% truthful, right? He may very well be telling the truth. I don't know. But he has a reason not to, because the other way those live rounds could have gotten there was through him. So let's try to get to the bottom of this. Let's bring in our experts. Prop master, armorer, author of the book, Prop Gun Safety for Film and TV, Dutch Merrick is back with us. And also joining me here in studio, former prop master with over a decade of experience, worked with Alec Baldwin on the film 13 Days to Glory, and also an attorney, Jeffrey Spellerberg, is with us. Thank you to you both for being here. Jeffrey, I'll start with you. You know, you look at the way this was pieced together by prosecutors in the first case. These are the dummy boxes. These were at Thel Reed's house. Hannah Gutierrez is his daughter. 2 + 2 = 4 is what they're saying.
I have a problem with anything Seth Kenney says. He's the one that's always testifying, the expert explaining where all these dummy rounds came from. And the fact of the matter is that he was the most likely person in any event to do this. And he injected himself very early into this case as a junior sleuth. And he shows himself up in maybe hundreds of hours or whatever, dealing with the detectives, dealing with the prosecutor. And the prosecutor's entire case is based upon 6 rounds with silver primers on them. And these apparently came from a bucket of 500 loose rounds. And as if the only possible rounds were these 6 rounds. But we are all forgetting Sarah Zachary. What did she do? As soon as it happened, she talked to somebody, apparently with Seth Kenney, and what happened? How many rounds disappeared? You know, you've got to ask yourself that question, Vinny. And were those all silver, or was she told to throw away some other type? Was she only told to throw away maybe the ones that didn't rattle? She scoured the set and made things disappear, and then the prosecutor based his entire case on, I'm able now to look at the real rounds that were found on set, but the only ones they were able to find, because 30 days, Sarah never told anybody until 30 days was after and she got her plea deal, right? That's what she did. So my opinion, you have a real problem with the prosecutor basing her entire case on, she can look at photographs, and then she's going to deny the evidence to the defense based on photographs, and the guy's trying to tell her, look, help my client out. There were more rounds other than the 4 you found on set, and they look different. That's what they're trying to tell her, and she decides on her own call. She puts herself in the game, says, I'm going to be the one who suppresses evidence, and I'm going to hide it. You know, if you want to have fairness for the Hutchins family, if you want to have fairness, you got to play fair. You got to play fair to get to the truth, and that's your obligation. Dutch, you know, looking at this box, these 45 long Colt JS dummies, does that look familiar to you at all? Have you ever dealt with the JS dummies? And
Does this make any sense that the armorer would go and get some dummy rounds from her dad and somehow mix them up with a live round?
I use reputable vendors for when I'm doing props on shows and armory. So we get them from the prop rental houses where Joe Swanson is a provider, and they're repackaged or reboxed for their brand. So, if it's cinema weaponry, it'll say cinema weaponry right on the box, but they may very well be Joe Swanson blanks. So I certainly have used them in the past. I acquire my dummy rounds generally also from the prop houses, and I imagine they have Joe Swanson manufacture those. When I rent a gun, they will include a few dummy rounds either way so that we have them to dress in or cycle with the gun. And the thought of Hannah Gutierrez-Reed mixing live rounds with dummies, as young and naive and overwhelmed and potentially inept as she may have been on that show, it's hard for me to imagine her growing up with her dad as she did, having that level of just a gun awareness that she could have possibly mixed live rounds and real and dummy rounds into the same box. It's hard for me to fathom. As bad as she screwed up with other things, I have a challenge seeing that could be a possibility. And I agree with Jeff, honestly, that right now it looks like all roads seem to point to Seth Kenney, who really did steer the investigation. From the very beginning, he was offering them guidance in the form of well, when we look at this and we look at that, and let's go look over there. And it came out in trial today that again and again and again, he said that in the past, he has basically laid the blame on her, like she did it, she's trying to hide it, those types of framings.
Yeah. And the bottom line, when you talk about dummies versus live rounds, they look similar. What's the difference between the silver primer and the brass primer? Is that a normal difference? What does that mean?
Well, manufacturers will manufacture primer. Now, remember, a cartridge is based in 4 components. The primer, which ignites the powder, which pushes the bullet, and it's all held together in the shell. Now, the different primer manufacturers make them either in a brass color or a silver nickel color. It came out in this trial, Seth Kenney said that Winchester stopped making nickel colored primers 10 years ago. So he used that as a dating mechanism to say, oh yeah, those must have been created so long ago because they stopped making them. And then later, he said also that Joe Swanson admitted that he tends to mix them up and use whichever primers are on hand. So in the same batch, you may see some silver ones.
You could get silver. That's interesting. All right, everyone stay where they are. When we come back, we'll take a look at the other theory, which is that they may have came from Seth Kenney. Don't go anywhere.
Did you grow suspicious of Mr. Kenney as he kept saying that?
No.
Oh, okay. So, in any event, you knew that Mr. Teskey was at least somewhat involved because when you're interviewing Mr. Kenney, he's calling him in front of you, correct?
Yes.
Sending you screenshots of messages with him, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Teskey showed up here, according to you, at the Hannah Gutierrez retrial, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Teskey then walked into the police precinct with ammunition that he claims and says is matching to the ammunition that struck Ms. Hutchins, right?
I don't think he ever made the statement it was matching.
Well, that's really for law enforcement and the FBI to decide, isn't it?
Which would have been investigated if he would have answered a phone call or returned a phone call.
Unbelievable moment, but this is important. So Seth Kenney clearly is under suspicion as being the source of this live round, clearly by Alec Baldwin's attorney and also by Hannah Gutierrez's attorney. But here he is when he's asked directly about that during Hannah Gutierrez's trial.
Did you provide any live ammunition to the set of arrest?
No.
Did you ever give any live ammunition to Sarah Zachary?
No.
So where would he get live ammunition from if he's a prop guy, right? Well, they were training the actors for 1883. They were training them. They were shooting real guns with live rounds. So take a listen to some of the testimony about all of that, because this is one of the theories as to how a live round ends up on the set of the movie Rust and in Alec Baldwin's gun in his hand and eventually in the body and through the body of Helena Hutchins.
At some point in time, did you and Mr. Reed work on a film together where Mr. Reed was an armorer or a coach and you were the vendor, the supplier?
That was, it was 1883. It wasn't a feature film. It was more of a, one-run episodic.
Was there coaching sessions that included real firearms?
There were. Then at some point, it was decided, and I'm not sure who made the decision, that they actually wanted to set up a private range on a portion of Taylor Sheridan's private ranch with an appropriate backstop and it controls. And that is where the cast, it was a bit of a team building as well, learned about how the functioning of the firearms, and we were mixed between blanks and live.
Do you know where the live ammunition came from that was used in those coaching sessions?
I do.
Where did it come from?
The .45 Long Colt came from Thale. He had a number of reloads that I asked him to bring because at that time it was very difficult to source live ammunition. It was difficult. So he had what turned out to be 325 reloads of .45 Long Colt.
Was all of the .45 Long Colt live ammunition that was used for the training camp on 1883, was it all used up?
No.
So can you tell us approximately how much was left over?
It was, if memory serves me correct, it was about 125 rounds, roughly.
And what happened to that ammunition after you finished training the actors on 1883?
Well, that's a little bit hazy. At one point, I do recall that certain things were offloaded from my Sprinter van because they just weren't needed. And that was one of those things. But at some point, it got moved back to Albuquerque, and I've never been able to pinpoint the date.
Let's talk about the dummy rounds that you provided to the set of Rust. Did you provide .45 Long Colt dummy rounds to the set of Rust?
I did. I supplied a single box of 50 on October 12th.
And where did those dummy rounds come from?
They had just come off of the day prior from the prop truck in Texas from 1883.
You did retain some of the reloaded live rounds after 1883 completed.
After the 1883 Cowboy Training Camp, yes.
And those then made their way back to Albuquerque, you've said, to PDQ Props, correct?
Yes.
And you don't know whether those returned, I think you've stated before October 21st. You said you were hazy on the date, right?
Yes.
But we do know that you came back to Albuquerque from 1883 on or about October 11th because you met with Sarah Zachary October 12th, correct?
Correct.
So when you came back, you brought dummy rounds from the set of 1883 to give to Sarah, correct?
Correct.
And those were .45 Long Colt dummy rounds?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you had a whole group of dummies on 1883. How many do you think there were?
5,000.
Okay. So out of those 5,000, you brought some back from Miss Zachary. And at some point, you can't tell the jury when, those live rounds came back to your place.
I've never been able to identify the exact date.
Well, you also said on direct, they were delivered back, let me get you the words you used. They were offloaded from your Sprinter van and got moved back to Albuquerque in the bathroom. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, when you said got moved, isn't that you who moved them back?
Yes.
Okay. So in reality, you drove them back from 1883, and you can't remember that date at all.
No.
All right, let me bring back in my guests. I've got Jeffrey Spellberg with me here in studio, and Dutch Merrick is with us as well. Jeffrey, your thoughts? You're not buying?
I don't buy a word he says. I mean, his story about 5,000 rounds of dummy rounds or whatever he's talking about, it's crazy. That I've never been on a movie set that had huge boxes of dummy rounds. And he also can't forget, he forgets every material date that really sort of puts him in the ringer. And then he turns around and he can remember all sorts of things about all sorts of people anytime that it doesn't involve him, or if he's pointing the finger at somebody else. And I was actually, Dutch has a good point about this too, and I don't, maybe we can get
go ahead, Dutch.
Oh, well, I think it's amazing that there's only 2 days that he traveled between Texas and Albuquerque, so it's a 50-50 shot at which day he came, but he's racked his brain and there's no way he can figure out on his calendar when he made that trip. I'm sorry, that just sounds really absurd, and I wouldn't accept that as an answer if I was a defense attorney.
How about moving the stuff into the bathroom? Do prop houses have bathrooms?
Well, first of all, prop houses, legitimate prop houses, do not have live ammunition. They are a sanitary, sterile environment, just like a film studio. You're dealing with firearms for actors, and you're dealing with a lot of guns that have been modified that if you put a regular round into them, they're going to blow up. So the last thing you're going to allow into a prop house is live ammunition. So the thought that he put it in his bathroom like that somehow makes it safe is really absurd to me.
Now, there was another part of that first trial, and this is, again, it was very shocking when we heard it the first time. Sarah Zachary, who's working for Seth Kenney on the Rust set, what she did after the shooting of Helena Hutchins. Take a listen.
Wouldn't you think that the police would want to see everything on set?
Yes.
So when you throw away rounds that they may have wanted to see, don't you understand that to be an issue?
No, because again, it wasn't the rounds in question.
But that isn't your determination, right, to determine what's in question. That is the law enforcement's determination, correct?
Okay.
Okay, Dutch, I'll begin with you. Is there a time and a place to throw away dummies?
This just boggles my mind. First of all, dummy rounds are an asset, and we all know it. So you've either rented them or purchased them for the production. And if you purchased them, you need to turn them into the production at the end of the job. And if you rented them, they have to go back to the prop house, or else you're going to have to buy them. The other thing that really weirds me out about what she says is she had to drive on her day off an hour each way to go get this precious box of dummies from Seth Kenney. Remember, he said there was none available because he had 5,000 of them on another show, but he says that he hand polished each one of 50, and he shined them up real nice, and he rattled them twice, and he checked each one. And Sarah Zachary has to drive out there on her day off and get this box of unobtainium, and then there she is on a film set thrown away after a take. Which is it? They're impossible to find, or they're like popcorn and you just throw them over your shoulder when you're done? It doesn't make any sense.
Does it make any sense to you, Jeffrey?
Not at all. His story about carefully polishing, I think they went on about 5 minutes about him carefully polishing every single round to make sure they were perfectly matching the stuff that he, I guess he did, how he knew they were on the set, they had to be polished, I don't know. But I've never heard of that in my life. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, that a guy would, if he spent a minute on each one, he spent an entire hour polishing dummy rounds to send down to Sarah Zachary. It's absurd.
And the other thing is the throwing away of these. To me, that makes zero sense. I don't think Sarah Zachary on her own is going to do that.
I don't think she's throwing away dummies. I think she's throwing away other live ammunition that was on that set. I think she was, I don't know if, I'm not going to couch it, but I don't know if Seth Kenney told her to do it, but apparently she was in communication right out of happened, finding out what happened, and all. If there was other ammunition on that set, it's gone, and all they ever found were the ones with the silver primers, and then the court built their entire case on it. He was their expert. Soon they were in bed with him, and once they're in bed with him, they can't change. The state can't change its story. Now they're stuck with whatever, they're saying everything that Seth Kenney sort of tells them to say. I think. I don't know where they're getting all these ideas.
So you don't think the prosecution followed the right path here in trying to determine where the live round came from?
I got to tell you, Seth Kenney's a suspect. How did he ever get to be this guy who's giving you advice and being your expert, or a pseudo-expert on this case? Well, how is he spending all this time with your CSI and telling her, you know, he's teaching her how to identify weapons? It's either CSI or it's another person. But he spends all this time, and she suddenly becomes an expert in New Mexico on how prop ammunition is supposed to look. He had every opportunity to steer it away from him, and I don't know if he did or not, but I wouldn't bet my life on any of that. So
I wouldn't either. All right, everyone is staying with us. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the gun that was in the hand of Alec Baldwin, the gun that killed Elena Hutchins.
One of the most successful true crime TV shows ever.
This is crazy.
Now has a new home on America's original true crime obsession, 48 Hours on Court TV. Coming up next on Court TV.
Who is Billy Ray Turner? How does he have any connection to Lorenzen Wright?
He was manipulated. See plans, he plotted. See the reason why he's gone.
Accomplice to Murder with Vinnie Politan. Sunday night, 8/7 Central. Only on Court TV.
For certain.
So based on the experiment that we did with this gun back in August of 2023, even if the hammer of the gun was damaged on October 21st of 2021, would the trigger have to be pulled for the gun to fire?
Two things. Yes, the trigger would have to be depressed or pulled. The hammer would have to be at the full cock position, and it can't be damaged because it would do what we saw here, and what you just saw here would not fire the gun.
So hypothetically, though, even if it were damaged on October 21st, the operator, that being Mr. Baldwin, would have had to have pulled the trigger.
Yes, if you could get the hammer to stay at the full cock position. That's the difficulty to overcome.
Which it doesn't want to do.
It will not do.
From the beginning, we've heard Alec Baldwin say to George Stephanopoulos and to others, I didn't pull the trigger. The gun went off. Do guns just go off? Well, this is the gun in question. Take a look. This is Alec Baldwin's Pieta long Colt .45 revolver. I'm not a gun expert, but we do have them on Court TV. We have one tonight. Here's Dutch Merrick breaking down this revolver so we better understand how it functions. Let's bring him back in. Dutch Merrick is with us. Dutch, give us a little more detail about what we just saw and what we just experienced and the significance in it in trying to figure out how the gun went off.
Well, I've heard since Alec Baldwin came out in the press ages ago now saying he didn't pull the trigger, And my specialty has been with semi-automatic pistols and firearms. However, I know a bunch of the cowboy shooters that do competitions with these old Western style guns. And I've talked to them at length, and they've explained to me that it's possible that this hammer can fly home without the trigger catching on one of the stops. And so they showed me this as an experiment, and I've been able to recreate it time and time again. What happens is the hammer has to come all the way back, and as it does, the trigger sets like a mousetrap into a little notch. But in order to do that, the trigger has to come forward a little bit. So if you just prevent the trigger from going forward that maybe 2 millimeters, it won't engage into the slot. And not only will it not engage in it, it leaves the hammer clear to go all the way down. It doesn't stop in the halfway point, doesn't stop in the safety. It just goes all the way home to a round. So if you pull it back and you've even bound the trigger a little bit, or you've got a little piece of material jammed up in there, some leather from the holster could be stuck up in the trigger, the hammer will go all the way forward and drop on a round. Of course, the odds that it would drop on a round in this instance were still only 1 in 6, because there was only 1 live round in this gun. It was crazy.
And just to kind of put this into perspective with what happened with Alec Baldwin, we saw in the video that was taken before the shooting in the morning, his finger seems to be in where the trigger is. So does that do what that little piece of blue material was doing in the video that you made, that if your finger is in there, even if you're not purposely pulling it back, your finger can prevent it from making that movement forward if your finger's in that slot?
Yeah, in theory, yes. And what I did was I just cut a little piece of blue plastic about 1 inch square and dropped it into that space. So it doesn't put any pressure on the trigger at all. It just prevents it from going forward. So what happens with these Western style revolvers, they have very small grips. So when you hold on to them, you can often only get 2 fingers around the grip. And it's common for shooters to put their first finger in the trigger guard as sort of a brace and kind of put your finger in and push away. If you do put your finger into the trigger guard and push away with your fingernail against that trigger guard, there's a potential that the fat of your finger, the little muscle on your middle digit, could actually press the trigger sideways, or at least impede it from swinging forward. And that's all you got to do to keep this hammer from locking into place, is impede its movement. Or if you just bound it unconsciously, not thinking you're pulling the trigger, you're just pressing the trigger sideways a little bit, it won't go into the notch, and it'll fall home every time.
So that makes some sense here, Jeffrey. So I guess it is technically possible that he's not pulling the trigger, but he's preventing the trigger from doing what it wants to do when you're pulling back the hammer.
Yeah, the crazy part is Alec Baldwin may be telling the absolute truth about what he experienced that day. And when Dutch explained that to me when I saw that, I believe that as well, because sometimes these guns have hair triggers. We heard today that this was supposedly a new gun, but apparently been used in a gun show for years, and apparently where people have been dry firing without the hammer pin in there. And so then they gave that gun to Seth Kenney, and that's the gun that ended up doing this. And there was also another misfire on the set with the same gun or a gun exactly like it during this movie, and it's very rare to have any misfires on a movie, and I think there were 3 on this movie. So there's something goofy about the guns maybe, or maybe there's just people that are untrained and really don't know how to handle weapons.
Absolutely. And we get back to Dutch. When the gun goes off, it's during a rehearsal, but I guess part of what they're rehearsing is what the gun is going to look like when it's coming up. Alec Baldwin likely focusing on the movements of his hand, but not knowing that. I mean, to me, that's something that they should be trained in, right? Is that, listen, you don't even have to pull the trigger. If your finger is within that finger guard, it can be enough to set the gun off even without squeezing the trigger by pulling the hammer back.
Well, when we create a scene, we choreograph every move with the gun, and we go through with the actor. We know where they're going to point it, when they're going to put their finger on the trigger, etc. And then we make the gun safe for the scene. And in this instance, it was a rehearsal. He was assured by 2 professionals that the gun didn't have any blanks in it, and that's the worst you can imagine. Is there any blanks or no blanks? That's it. It's a positive or negative. So it only had dummies in it, so they can be seen from the camera as though the front of the revolver looked like it's loaded. So the worst thing he can ever imagine happening is that if he did drop the hammer and there was a big mistake made and there was a blank in there, it would be a loud bang and a puff of smoke. Worst case, someone's really close to it, they get burned. But he's in a headspace thinking that everything he does with that gun is entirely safe. So if these people are standing in front of them, he's not conscious of the fact that it can kill, because in his 40-year career, he's never had a blank gun that was set up to kill a person.
We're out of time.
Got you, Brad.
You knew it. You could read it in my eye.
Took it away,
Jeffrey Spellerberg, thank you so much for all your help and all your help with us here at Court TV. Dutch Merrick also stepping up big time for us. We really do.